All right, so you want to know about Canada, eh? Not the sorry and Sarah bullshit, but the real deal. We dug into some intel from Wikipedia, and we're going deep on this bitch.
Good call. Canada's history is a goddamn roller coaster ride.
Right, so first off, where the hell did the name Canada even come from? Sounds like some made-up shit.
It's pretty wild, actually. Starts back in 1535 with this French explorer, Jacques Cartier, asking some Iroquois folks about the way to Stadacona.
Which is now Quebec City, right?
Exactly. And they used the word Canada, meaning village or settlement, to, point him in the right direction.
And I bet Carrier fucked it up somehow.
Oh, he did, big time. Cartier, being the asshat that he was, thought they were talking about the whole damn region.
So he just
Slapped the name Canada on his maps, and it just stuck.
So some random Iroquois dudes accidentally named a whole country. Talk about bad luck.
Right. And it gets worse. You see, before the Europeans showed up, Canada was already home to a shitload of different indigenous groups. First Nations, Inuit and Métis. They had their own cultures, languages, systems of government, the whole 9 yards.
So what happened when the Europeans showed up? Did everyone just sing Kumbaya?
Fuck no! That's where the whole settler colonialism thing rears its ugly head. These European powers weren't interested in sharing. They wanted the land, the resources, the whole damn pie.
And they didn't give a rat's ass about who was already there.
Pretty much. They used forced assimilation, made treaties that they broke faster than a New Year's resolution, and generally made life hell for the indigenous population.
And the Indian Act didn't help matters, I bet.
Oh, hell no. That was some straight-up oppression, designed to control every aspect of indigenous life and basically erase their cultures.
It's like a dark chapter in Canadian history.
Definitely. And its effects are still felt today.
So let's get into these European assholes. First, it was the French who showed up in Quebec.
Yeah, back in the early 1600s, Samuel de Champlain, another French explorer, established the first permanent settlements in Port Royal and Quebec City.
And they were there for.
They were all about the fur trade, spreading Catholicism, and claiming as much land as possible.
Classic. And then the Brits came along and wanted a piece of the pie.
Of course. They couldn't resist sticking their noses in. It became this big pissing contest between the French and the British.
The indigenous people stuck in the middle.
You got it. They had this whole war over beavers, actually.
Wait, what? A war over those little furry bastards.
Yeah, the Beaver Wars. Sounds ridiculous, but it was a brutal conflict in the 17th century, all about controlling the fur trade.
So basically everyone was greedy little shits back then, obsessed with beaver pelts.
Pretty much. But in the end, the French got their asses kicked.
Oh yeah, I remember that. When was that again?
1763. After years of fighting, France was forced to give up almost all of its North American colonies to Britain. Total humiliation. The Treaty of Paris made it official and completely changed the map of North America.
So that's how Canada became this British playground.
Pretty much. But things were about to get even more interesting thanks to our friends down south.
You mean the American colonies getting all pissed off at the Brits?
Exactly. The American Revolution. They actually tried to convince Canada to join their rebellion.
But that didn't fly, did it?
Nope. A lot of Canadians actually sided with the British. They were called loyalists, and after the American Revolution, thousands of them headed north.
So Canada became a refuge for a bunch of sore losers.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
Pretty much. And their arrival had a huge impact on Canadian society, changed the demographics, intensified the cultural divide between the French and the English.
Didn't they have some serious beef, the French and the English?
Oh, yeah, constantly. The Brits tried to calm things down by splitting the province of Quebec in 1791.
How they split it?
They created Lower Canada, mostly French, and Upper Canada, mostly English.
Did that work?
Hell no. It just made things more complicated. And by the 1830s, both Upper and Lower Canada were demanding more political autonomy. Things got so heated they actually had rebellions in 1837.
Wait, Canada had rebellions. What the fuck?
Yep. But they got crushed.
So the Brits just cracked down even harder.
Not quite. The rebellion scared the shit out of them. They realized they needed to change their approach. They sent this British politician, Lord Durham, to investigate.
What'd he say?
His report basically said, hey, maybe we should give these colonies more self-governance and assimilate the French into English culture.
Assimilate the French. Good fucking luck with that. Didn't work out so well in the past.
Nope, but they tried. Merged Upper and Lower Canada into the single province of Canada in 1840.
Did that solve anything?
Nope, but they did start granting more autonomy to the colonies. By 1855, all the British North American provinces east of Lake Superior had responsible government.
Okay, so things were slowly starting to change.
Yeah.
But what about the rest of Canada? Was it just a skinny little strip along the U.S. border back then?
Hell no. They had their eyes on the West. They settled the Oregon boundary dispute with the U.S. in 1846, extending the border west along the 49th parallel.
That's a big chunk of land.
It opened the door for British colonies on Vancouver Island and in British Columbia.
Wait, Vancouver Island was a separate colony.
Yeah, weird, right? They eventually merged with British Columbia in 1866. The westward expansion was fueled by that manifest destiny kind of thinking.
So they were just steamrolling over everyone in their path.
Pretty much. Building transcontinental railways, passing laws to encourage settlement. They pushed indigenous folks off their land to make room for European immigrants.
Didn't the indigenous people fight back?
Oh, they did. There were major conflicts like the Red River Rebellion in 1869 led by the Métis. They were fighting for their land, their rights, their survival.
But I bet they were outnumbered and outgunned.
Sadly, yes. The government forced indigenous people onto reserves, disrupting their traditional way of life. It was a brutal period.
So how the hell did Canada actually become a country?
Well, after a bunch of constitutional conferences, the Brits finally decided to let their North American colonies form a confederation. In 1867, they passed the British North America Act.
And boom, Canada was born.
Just like that. It was a pretty calculated move by the British, though.
Also,
They wanted to create a united front against possible American expansion and get those colonies off their payroll.
win-win for them. So Canada was born out of political expediency. Classic.
Pretty much. But the new country was still under British rule, at least in terms of foreign affairs. It took a while for Canada to truly become independent.
All right, so we've got Canada, this brand new country, stitched together from a bunch of colonies. What happens next?
Well, they weren't exactly kicking back and relaxing. They were still gobbling up land and resources. Manitoba joined the party in 1870, followed by British Columbia in 1871, and Prince Edward Island in 1873. The Klondike Gold Rush in the late 1890s led to the Yukon Territory.
A gold rush. Now we're talking.
Yeah.
So Canada was already getting that go west vibe.
Oh, yeah, big time. It was a period of rapid growth and development, but it came at a cost. The government established the Northwest Mounted Police to assert their authority, often clashing with indigenous communities.
Sounds like a wild time.
It was a real-life Western movie. But there was also a massive exodus of Canadians heading south to the U.S. during this time.
What the fuck? Why would anyone leave Canada for the U.S.?
Life wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Between 1871 and 1896, almost a quarter of the Canadian population headed south, lured by better economic opportunities and a less harsh climate.
So while they were expanding westward, they were losing people to their southern neighbor. That's some irony.
It sure is. But despite the challenges, Canada continued to grow, eventually becoming a major player on the world stage.
Okay, so we've covered the early days. But what about the 20th century? Did Canada finally ditch the Brits and become their own boss?
Well, that's a story for part 2.
Damn, you're killing me. But all right, we'll pick this up next time on our deep dive into Canada.
All right, so Canada in the 20th century, time of massive global shifts, figuring out their whole identity thing.
Did they finally grow some balls and ditch the Brits for good?
It was a process, not like flipping a switch. World War I really kicked things into gear.
Even though Canada was already independent, right?
Well, technically, yeah. But they were still tied to Britain's foreign policy. So when Britain declared war in 1914, Canada was automatically in it too.
Bunch of Canadian farmers shipped off to die in some muddy trench in Europe. What a deal.
Brutal, man. The Canadian Corps, made up of volunteers, got a reputation for being tough as nails, fought in some of the worst battles of the war.
Like Vimy Ridge.
Exactly. Total bloodbath. And then there was the whole conscription thing.
Forcing people to fight didn't go over well, I bet.
Shit show, man. The government wanted to conscript more soldiers, but French Canadians in Quebec were like, hell no, we're not dying for the British Empire. Almost ripped the country apart.
War brought out all the old tensions, eh?
Big time. Showed how deep the divide still ran. But even with all that drama, Canada's role in World War I put them on the map.
Okay, so they survived World War I. What about the years between the wars? Did they just chill and lick their wounds?
Not really. Roaring 20s brought economic good times, some social changes. Then the Great Depression hit, just like everywhere else.
And I bet that independence thing was still simmering.
Oh, yeah. In 1919, Canada joined the League of Nations as its own country. That was a big deal. Then in 1931, they passed the Statute of Westminster, recognized Canada's right to make its own laws separate from Britain.
So they finally dumped the Brits.
Not quite. still shared a monarch and hadn't fully taken control of their constitution, but it was a huge step.
Okay, then World War II explodes. Did they jump in right away?
They declared war on Germany, but it was a close call. Lots of debate about getting involved in another European war.
I can imagine.
But once they were in, they were all in. Over 1 million Canadians served in World War II. They fought in Italy, Normandy, the Netherlands, all over.
And did the conscription ship come up again?
Oh, you bet. Caused more friction between the French and English. But they pulled together and helped win the war.
Okay, so World War II ends. Canada's on the winning side. What happens next? Do they become this global peacekeeping badass?
In a way, yeah. After the war, their economy boomed. Got really into internationalism, peacekeeping missions, helping developing countries.
So they were the good guys.
They tried. But let's not forget, Canada, like every other country, has its own skeletons.
Like what?
Treatment of Indigenous peoples was still a huge problem. The residential school system, kidnapping Indigenous kids, trying to erase their culture.
That's fucked up.
It is. Shameful part of Canadian history. The post-war period also saw the rise of Quebec nationalism.
Didn't they want to separate from Canada altogether?
Yep. Led to 2 referendums on Quebec sovereignty, one in 1980 and another in 1995. Both were close, but Quebec stayed part of Canada.
So Canada almost broke up.
It was a tense time, but they held it together. And in 1982, they finally patriated their constitution from Britain, fully in charge of their own laws. They also adopted the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
That was a big deal.
Huge. Marked the end of their colonial past, beginning of a new era.
Okay, so what about Canada today? Are they still this peace-loving, peacekeeping nation?
They like to think so, but the world's different now. They've been involved in military interventions in Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, usually as part of NATO, though.
So they're not afraid to fight.
It's complicated. They've got this peacekeeping history, but they're also willing to get their hands dirty. Balancing act, trying to be the good guys while protecting their interests.
What about Canadian culture? Are they just a watered-down version of the U.S.?
Fuck no. Canada has its own unique culture, shaped by its history, geography, all the different people who've settled there.
Okay, so what makes Canadian culture different?
Well, they have 2 official languages, English and French. That's a big part of their identity. And they're a multicultural society.
But do they have their own distinct cultural identity?
Absolutely. Canadians often define themselves by what they're not, namely American. More reserved, polite, socially progressive.
And they've got that universal healthcare thing.
Big source of national pride.
So are they like the cool, laid-back cousin of the U.S.?
Something like that. But they've got their problems too. Income inequality, housing affordability, systemic racism.
So not a perfect utopia.
Nope. Like everywhere else. Work in progress.
So Canada's got this long, complicated history. They're still figuring out their place in the world. They've got their own culture. What's the big takeaway here?
Canada is a country of contradictions. They've come a long way, but they've got a long way to go. They want to be a force for good, but they're not afraid to use force. They're proud of their multiculturalism, but they're dealing with racism and inequality.
Mixed bag, eh? Not perfect, but interesting.
Exactly. And their story's still being written. Who knows what the next chapter will hold?
Speaking of stories, didn't you say you had some fun facts about Canada? You know, quirky shit that makes them unique.
Oh, yeah. Tons of those. Did you know Canada has the longest coastline in the world?
Seriously? Longer than Russia?
Yep. Over 243,000 kilometers. They also have more lakes than any other country, over 2 million.
Holy fuck, that's a lot of water. What else?
They were the 3rd country to launch a satellite into space. And that Canadarm thing on the space shuttle, Canadian invention.
Canadians in space.
Their boreal forest is the largest intact forest on Earth. And the world's largest beaver dam is in Canada. So big you can see it from space.
A beaver dam from space.
Amazing, right?
Okay, so we've got this country with a complex history, a unique culture, some achievements, and a lot of beaver dams. What else can you tell us about Canada?
Well, we could dive into their economy, their political system, their healthcare system.
Oh, well, hold on. That sounds like a whole other deep dive. Let's save that for part 3. Okay, so we've talked a lot of shit about Canada, their history, their culture, their goddamn beaver dams. What's left to cover?
We haven't really gotten into their economy or where they fit in the world today.
All right, so let's dive into that. Are they just riding America's coattails, or do they actually have their own thing going?
They have their own thing going on, but it's hard to ignore the giant moose in the room. Canada and the U.S., their economies are totally intertwined.
Yeah, they share that massive border, tons of trade back and forth. But what's Canada actually good at? What do they bring to the table?
They're a resource powerhouse, for starters. Timber, oil, minerals, and agriculture, a major producer of wheat and grains.
So like the world's breadbasket and lumberyard.
Yeah, kinda. But they're not just stuck in the past. They've got a growing tech sector, especially in cities like Toronto and Vancouver. And their financial system's pretty stable. More than some other countries, that's for sure.
But they're still dependent on trade with the U.S., right?
True, but they're trying to diversify, signing free trade agreements all over the globe, European Union, those Asian countries in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, places like that.
It's not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Really?
Smart. What about their society, though? Are they as progressive as they like to pretend?
They're ahead of the curve on some things, that's for sure. Universal health care, for one. Same-sex marriage, legal weed, things like that.
Yeah, they jumped on that whole cannabis thing early.
But they've got issues, same as everyone else. Income inequality is getting worse. Housing's a goddamn nightmare in the big cities. Systemic racism is still a thing.
So not quite utopia, then.
Nope. No country is. They're a work in progress, just like everyone else.
Okay, so Canada is this mix of economic power, progressive poster child, and a country wrestling with its own bullshit. What's the one thing you want people to remember about Canada?
That Canada is a country of contradictions. They've come a long way, but they've got a long way to go. Want to be the good guys, but they'll use their military when they think it's necessary. Proud of their multiculturalism, but still working through the racism and inequality.
Sounds kind of messy, honestly.
Yeah.
But an interesting mess.
Exactly. Complex, constantly evolving. Their story's not over yet, and it's a story worth paying attention to.
So to everyone listening, keep this in mind. Canada might be America's quiet neighbor, but they're full of surprises. Trying to figure out their past, their present, their place in the world. Maybe someday they'll get the recognition they deserve. Until then, we'll just have to keep digging, eh? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Canada.
Cheers to that. It's been one hell of a ride.